and welcome to another episode of Because the World Needs Water, or Porque o Mundo Precisa de Água em português. The program where we dive deep into the most pressing water issues around the world and spotlight the people who are making the difference. I'm Everton de Oliveira, as you know, Professor Agua, and today I'm honored to welcome a truly remarkable guest, Brian Richter, President of Sustainable Waters. What a nice name, isn't it? It's a good name for an institute like ours. Brian is a global thought leader on freshwater sustainability with more than 40 years of experience in water science, policy, and public engagement. His work has influenced water management strategy across the globe, from major river basins to community level initiatives. You may know him, or if you don't, please do from now on, as the author of The Chasing Water, a book that changed how many of us understand the value and limits of our freshwater resources. Brian's voice has reached countless people through his writing, public speaking, and media appearances. And his passion for protecting rivers, aquifers, and the people who depend on them is deeply aligned with the mission of our own program. Let's welcome him and dive into a conversation that I'm sure will be both enlightening and inspiring. Brian, welcome. You spend your life advocating for smarter, more sustainable use of fresh water. What sparked that passion for water, and how did it lead you to create sustainable waters? Welcome.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks for the invitation. Great to be with you today. And I think my interest in water started when I was fairly young. When I was in high school, I lived in Southern California,
Okay.
and even at that time, we were having some very challenging water shortage issues in California. And so they would start to put us on mandatory water conservation. They told us that you can't water your lawn, you can't wash your car, this sort of thing. And I had a thought at that time that if I could become an expert in water, I would have good job security for the rest of my life, because it
You
seemed
were
like
correct.
that
You were correct.
yeah. And it has certainly turned out that way, that unfortunately, water challenges have not gone away or even gotten much smaller, right, in much of the world. So that was really a big motivation. And the other was that I was really lucky to have grown up with parents who really exposed me to nature, to getting out in the outdoors and to experiencing, being on, near water, near lakes and rivers and that sort of thing. And so as I got into my college years, I really wanted to try to do something to make sure that those areas were and those water supplies were protected to the extent that we could.
That's interesting. And how did you come up with the sustainable water, your institution now?
Oh, that's a great. Well, uh, I spent about 3 decades in one of the world's largest conservation organizations called the Nature Conservancy. And I ended up being the global director for that organization in water for a long time. And we traveled all over the world and learned an awful lot along the way and saw some really challenging issues, and also was very inspired by a lot of the people that I met. And the word sustainability has always stuck with me, particularly since back in the early 1990s. I think it really sort of caught hold, was really kind of um, became a more recognized concept. And the basic idea of being able to utilize resources in a way that doesn't diminish their quantity or their quality over time seemed to make a lot of sense to me. And, the word sustainability has been, kind of very heavily used, and some would say misused in some cases, used for, sort of profit-making enterprises that sometimes kind of stretch the concept a little bit, if we might say. And but it just seemed to me, I stuck with it. I said, no, if I'm going to talk about water, then I want to talk about sustainable waters. So
Oh, that's very good. Well, we had the same idea because we created the Sustainable Water
yeah,
Institute.
isn't that wonderful?
And it is. Congratulations for your idea then.
Well, you've taken it to an institute, so.
Well, that's okay. You're doing a great job. So, talking about the chasing water, one of the most compelling messages in your book is the idea that water scarcity is often a management issue more than a resource issue. Could you explain that idea for our audience and share how that insight has shaped your work, please?
Yes. Well, yeah, and thank you for asking that question. I mentioned that I was in the Nature Conservancy for 3 decades, and I worked on every kind of water issue, Everton, that you can imagine. We worked on water pollution issues. We worked on shortages of water, in farming and for cities. We worked on dam building issues all around the world. We worked on the Three Gorges Dam in China and dams in India, dams in Africa. But so every kind of issues. But the one that really stuck with me or that concerned me the most was this concept of water scarcity. The idea that we wouldn't have enough water to continue to do what we had become accustomed to doing, or even the amount of water that we need in our day-to-day lives. And so that was really became my passion area, if you will. My sort of subset of water issues started to really hone in on water scarcity. And then, of course, as we all know, over the last couple of decades, we've all come to realize that a changing climate is having an influence on our water systems, both on too much water side with exacerbated flooding in many parts of the world, but also in reducing the available water supplies in many other places in the world. And so chasing water really came out of an interest to share what I had learned from those decades of working in more than 40 countries around the world, and learning so much from where solutions, strategies had been applied successfully, and also where they had not, where they failed. That's an important learning lesson as well, right? And so I tried to document, what I'd learned, what I'd seen in chasing water, and hoping that it's helpful for others that are facing those same kinds of challenges.
Interesting. Let me ask you one personal question about your book, because I've read your book. I like I told you, and I like the level of the language, because you try to reach a wider audience than just hydrologists or hydrogeologists like ourselves, right? And
Yes.
and I do think you've done a great job with that. But when
Thank
we read on the on the press, or people reviewing your material and things like that, my impression, because some of them says that you didn't dive deep enough in some of the subjects, and my impression is that someone at the press get call a person that knows hydrology to write about to review your book, and then he thinks it's too shallow because he's a hydrologist.
you. Right.
My impression, that's my impression, I want you to say what you think, is that they didn't get the message, because the idea is another one, right? So if
Yes.
you wanted to write something for hydrologists, that would be another book, not
Yes.
chasing water, right?
Yes.
What is your say about that?
Well, after working on water issues, for a long time, and seeing how the media reported on water issues, and talking to a lot of friends and students and colleagues about, their reactions, it was very common to hear that water's too complicated. It's I don't know what are they talking about this Colorado River or this thing and that. The Aral Sea drawing up. It's like I don't understand what happened there. That kind of thing. And it really struck me. Oh, and then in addition to that, Everton was, I was giving a lot of presentations, right? I was asked to speak in all kinds of different places, and something started happening on a recurring basis, which was somebody would ask a question from the audience that made it obvious to me that some words that I had used were not widely comprehensible to everybody.
It's true.
And that made a very, very big impression on me. I said, we hydrologists, we in the water community need to be a lot more careful with our language so that we're not leaving everybody else behind. And so I took it on as, that it was imperative for me to start not assuming that my audience knew anything about water so that I could bring everybody, my readers or my listeners along, and not lose them on the way. And so that became my challenge for everything that I, wrote and talked about and, was how do I say this in the simplest way possible and also in the shortest way possible? Because that's another thing is, those of us that are in the technical world, we can go on and it's not just the language, but we're boring people eventually, I think. So, so that was it. I set out to write with Chasing Water. I set out to write the simplest, shortest book that I could. But some of the critics' points, I constantly had to make a decision about, well, do I need to also tell that story, or do I need to go into greater depth to explain this concept?
Exactly.
And I decided that could be left to other materials. If I've scratched your curiosity and brought you up along the learning path a little bit, then there are thousands of other places that you can go to go deeper, right?
I agree with you totally. I can share you my experience. I was trying to write in a simple way for a wider audience. I learned something, on the internet on how to rewrite. You're always trying to learn. And I got at that time. Today things changed a bit with all the AI stuff. But then
Yes.
I get my text, I write a text, and I pick the words that I thought were too hydrological, for example, something that I didn't feel was too simple or simple enough. And I went to Google Ads, like I was buying advertisement for that specific word.
Yeah.
Uh, and when at that time I haven't used that for so long. When I typed the word, they show how many clicks it would generate on average. And on
Yeah.
the side, they offered 10 different words with way more clicks.
Wow. That's a great idea.
So
That
I was rewriting everything with words picking from the Google Ads.
That's wonderful.
It
That's a
was.
terrific idea.
It worked. It worked. And
Yeah.
then, after some time, you incorporate this no language. You don't have to go to Google anymore because now you know some words that are equivalent or sort of.
Yes.
And
So you
since
learn to speak differently.
exactly, exactly. So that's how I trained myself at the beginning. That's funny.
Well, you're reminding me of, so one of the most common misunderstandings in my presentations in particular would be, I go all the way through the presentation and then somebody raises their hand and say, you talk about running out of water. How can that happen? I mean, don't we have the same amount of water on the planet that we've always had?
Yeah.
And I realized that, oh, I have to really explain again, as simply as I can, the mechanics of how, with the water resource that you use yourself and locally, how if cumulatively all the people that are using that resource are using it faster than it's being replenished,
Finished.
and we can use all the different, analogs, bank accounts,
Yes, you
those
use
sorts of
that.
things.
Yes, yes.
If you're spending faster than you're earning, then you quickly get into trouble. And then was, the challenge, of course, of coming up with, pictorial representations, cartoons of this is how it happens. Your bathtub, if if water's going out the drain faster than it's coming in
The
through
shower, exactly.
anyway. So, but those are examples of the kinds of concepts that are really, it really opened my eyes that the vast majority of human beings, have, you have to, there's some key core concepts
Yeah.
that are really, really important to get across, pretty early in the discussion or in the presentation. So,
That's true. That's true. Another thing that we prepared, I have uh, one sort of material that we prepared. It's called Professor Agua Answers, right? So
yes,
the kids ask a question. Usually the questions are, I prepare the questions because they don't have enough uh,
yes,
questions to do, but are very simple questions, very simple questions. And then I explain the concept. Usually it's a 20 to 30-second video, very short, and has animation on it. It's very simple to go on social media. I know that
yes,
kids are not supposed to see the social media, but the parents show them themselves on there. And the good thing is that parents come and say, "Look, I didn't know that. I didn't know the answer."
yes,
So that was this is the so we reach the parents through kids. The kids learn it as well, but most parents love it. So that was
yeah.
one way of trying. So I have that experience of yours of trying to reach and explain concepts in a simple way. That's very nice. That's very nice.
Well, and you're bringing up another issue, which is, the communication vehicles,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So, you know, not many people read technical scientific journal papers. The trends, in communications these days are less people, I think, are reading books, or
Definitely.
maybe a smaller portion of the population. And so, you mentioned videos. I think, I've only experimented just a very little bit, but kind of person on the street interviews, where you just kind of stop a university student and you say, "Hey, do you know where your water comes from?" Or, whatever. And so we've got a couple of those, on my Sustainable Waters website. But I think we all in these, particularly in these technical fields, we need to find ways to communicate in multiple ways, but
Definitely.
also I think tapping the video. There are a couple of, by the way, there are a couple of scientists now, delivering videos on physics and
Yes.
mathematics and all kinds of things, and they're doing such a beautiful job of it. I'm really happy to see that.
Yeah, yeah. I'll send you some of the videos, and then you
Thank you.
let me know what you think, because you're gonna be a good person to tell me what I'm doing wrong or right. That's
And they'll
very
help spread them around.
Yeah, that's very good. That's very good. So you helped communities with your sustainable waters, communities, governments, and companies like better design water allocation and conservation strategies. Can you share a success story that highlights how collaboration and good data can lead to real progress?
Hmm. Well, I think many, many different examples come to mind. And oftentimes it's just making an agency or a company aware, um, either aware of the problem or aware that there are alternative ways of using their water or ways of reducing their water use. So we worked with a lot of big corporations, around the world, Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola and General Mills and Unilever and, But one thing that has been a lot of that I think has been very important in our work recently is that we have been, and so in the last few years, in our publications, you'll see a number of case studies, Everton, where we really looked at a particular river basin and very carefully documented where every drop of water goes. You know, how much goes to irrigated farms? How much goes to cotton versus apples? You know, that sort of thing. So really detailing where the water goes. And we've done this for a number of different river basins, particularly in the Western United States recently. We're just completing one on the Rio Grande, which is known as the Rio Bravo in Mexico. And we put a lot of effort into that because I think one of the principles I tried to share with my students at the university is that to solve particularly a water shortage problem, you really need to understand how the water is being consumed.
Exactly.
And the more detail you can get, the more enlightened or available different strategies might be for you. And so we've, sometimes we'll kind of play out different scenarios. We'll say, okay, this is how it's being used. If you did this, here's what you would get. If you did that, here's what you'd get. If you did it this way, it'll probably cost about this much a year, that kind of thing. And those products tend to reach diverse audiences, meaning that, it's the people who are supplying water to cities. It's the people who are operating, power plants, energy generating plants, farmers, and so on and so forth. So I think some of those examples are really, really helpful. One other thing I think is important to say for your listeners, I think, is that our abilities to measure and quantify different aspects of the water cycle have improved, I would argue almost to a miraculous degree in the recent decades.
Yeah.
We're using things like satellites to measure the changing amount of volume of water underground, right? Your field in groundwater. They're even now talking about measuring, the flow, how much water is moving down a river, from remote imagery. And so, data collection networks actually getting out there on the ground or in the river and measuring, what's going on. That's always challenging to afford the equipment and the capacity, the expertise to be able to do that. But more and more, we see those networks of data collection, being invested in. So I think that's it. It's, it comes down to, how do we develop the best possible information? How do we make access to that information? Global data sets. The fact that I was able to go into Mexico's data sets to be able to describe water use on the Mexican side of the Rio Bravo, very important. But then it all comes back, right, to what we were talking about earlier, and then being able to communicate in a way that everybody can understand it, hopefully.
Exactly. Otherwise, we're going to be talking to ourselves in the same
Yes.
way.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
true. That's true.
Yes.
Well,
Yes.
you work on rivers, aquifers, ecosystems, and human systems. In your experience, where do the biggest gaps remain in connecting science, policy, and practice in water management? And when that's something else for you. How do you, before you answer that question, how do you explain water management for someone who's illiterate in water? Because that's a tricky thing as well, isn't it?
Yes, I'm glad you bring that up. You're absolutely right. That's another one of those trigger misunderstandings is what do you mean by management? What is managing water, right?
Exactly.
And so, people who, the water managers who pay attention to how much water is available, how much is being replenished, and then helping to distribute that water, in an equitable and a necessary and a profitable way for economic enterprises. No, that's a good concept to bring up is, so to your viewers, to your listeners, there are individuals who hold the title of water manager, and it is both their responsibility and in many cases their authority to make those decisions for the benefit of all of us.
Yes.
They do have the knowledge, they do have the expertise, and they pay close attention to water that's incoming, that's available, and where it's going, and how we need to adjust day to day, month to month, year to year, to make sure that we don't get into trouble with it. So it's, gosh, I don't know. I don't, it's probably dangerous to do metaphors, on the fly, but maybe like they're
I
like
agree. Yes.
they're like financial advisors. If you're trying to get help with how do you manage your income and your expenditures from a financial advisor, well, that's kind of what water managers do, right? Is, maybe there's some similarities there. Yeah,
So
but
where do you think then the biggest gaps
oh,
remain in connecting
yes,
everything there?
yes. You know, hmm, I think the biggest challenge is the willingness of political leaders and water managers to make tough decisions about water. So let's go.
Good point.
Let's go back to the very simple concept that water is, of course, essential for so much of our lives and our livelihoods. We depend upon it, absolutely. And so when when there's not enough water to continue doing what we have been doing recently or in the past, somebody has to be able to tell you that you can't continue to use that much. We don't have enough water to go around, the way that we used to. But it is one of the most politically difficult pieces of communication that I've seen, in humanity. To tell people they have to get by with less water is a really, really difficult thing to do. It tends to elicit a very adverse reaction, shall we say. In
Definitely.
some communities I've seen around the world, there have been protests, there have been revolts, sometimes even violent,
Amen.
where people have been told, no, we don't have any more water for you to put on your farm, and then you have this very, very, severe reaction to that, understandably, right? So it's that political willingness to make that communication. But along with that, of course, Everton is if you're going to come with bad news, it's a good idea to come with some solutions at the same time.
Oh,
So trying to being knowledgeable enough to say, okay, well, we can't use as much, and here's some options for how we can kind of adjust, and get through this. And and a big part of that, the last thing I'll say about that, in my Chasing Water book, I talk about water democracies, local water democracies, right? And what I meant by that is I wanted to really emphasize the importance of engaging the communities, the local water using communities, in a dialogue about those challenges and about those potential solutions. And the better that our leaders and our managers can do that, I think the better the resulting outcomes are going to be.
since you work a lot with communication as well, right? So
Yes.
public awareness is key to driving water action.
Yeah.
Public awareness is not an easy thing to reach. What
Yes.
communication tools or strategy have you found most effective in helping people understand the urgency and the solutions when it comes to water sustainability?
Even though we've moved into this virtual reality of social media, and not to disparage it, it's a very effective tool for disseminating information, right? But I think human beings are still human beings at the end of the day. And what I mean by that is we have been communicating in a very personal way, like you and I are right now, by looking each other in the eye and having a discussion, having a conversation. And and I've really emphasized that with my colleagues and with my students in particular, because they tend to not want to schedule a face-to-face meeting, or they might not even be inclined to pick up the telephone and call somebody and speak to them live. They said, well, he never answered my email. Well, I said, well, did you try, a more direct line of communication? Anyway, so I have found that some of the biggest successes that we've had over the decades have been, when we sit down and having a person-to-person communication about it. I'll give you one example. We went. I led a very, very small group, dare I call it a delegation, 5 of us, 6 of us. We were very concerned about the fact that in the Yangtze River in China, that after the construction of the Three Gorges Dam, the way that they were controlling the flow of the river and releasing water downstream of the dam was having an effect on the downstream environment. And specifically, there are 4 species of carp fish. They're called the 4 famous carp of China. They feed, those 4 species of fish feed tens of millions of people who catch them directly out of the Yangtze River. But these carp had stopped reproducing because of the way that the dam had changed the flow of water in the river downstream of the dam. And so we said, we could protest this in the national media, we could write papers and stories about it and that. And we said, no, we're gonna go to the source. We scheduled a meeting. It was pretty complicated to schedule a meeting with the leadership of the Three Gorges Corporation in China, but we succeeded in getting a meeting with them. And it was a very, very formal meeting, large conference room table. longer than most of our bedrooms, I would say. And so we had this meeting, and they had said, okay, we're going to give you a half an hour, and so we got in the meeting very respectful, and they said, we want you to ask questions, Well, we asked questions, and they were very forthcoming. They answered our questions very directly, very openly. And we said, we came to the end of the half hour, and we said, please, now it's time, we've run out of time. They said, no, please, do you have more questions? Anyway, this went on for a little while. And by the end of that meeting, when we finally said, okay, we're all out of questions, it's time for you to ask something of us. And the president of the corporation, one of the largest dam building corporations in the entire world, they're building dams all over the world. He says, he asked this question, he said, who do you think had a longer lasting impact on the American conservation movement, John Muir or Gifford Pinchot? And now most of your listeners won't know who those individuals are, but basically his question was preservation versus sustainable development, okay? But anyway, that moment just
Interesting.
sealed the relationship. That sort of solidified, that was the word I was looking for. And we ended up working very productively with them. And to end that story on a high note, it turned out that it required a very, very little adjustment in the release of water. During the springtime, when these carp are ready to reproduce in the Yangtze River, they have to release more water out of the dam and create a pulse, a small flood of water. And it turns out that stimulates, we knew from the biologists, that stimulates the reproduction in the fish. And all of a sudden they were reproducing like crazy again. So sorry, that's a very long answer to your great question, but
But that was a very good answer. Very good answer.
communication, personal communication, can't emphasize it enough.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. I really enjoy it. And so it is a water management issue after all.
Yes, 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 it is. Yes, it is. It is. And getting people to like I said, it's for leadership and those of us who know a lot about water. It's our imperative to help lead those discussions, to enable and convene those discussions, but also engaging as much of the affected parties as possible in the discussion. I think is really important.
Very good. Very good. Congratulations. Very good. So
Thank you.
I have to ask you a question because it's my business now. That's what I studied all my life. Groundwater is a core issue in both our organization missions, right? So from your perspective, what needs to change globally and locally for
Mm.
groundwater to receive the attention and protection it deserves? Because we only do things on groundwater when we run out of the source, right? Like you have the Yogalala aquifer in US and many other places in the world. We're running out of enough water for irrigation, for example. So
Yes.
what we do? We can only use this, alarming accidents and mismanagement to, you know, I don't like to teach under catastrophic conditions because it usually brings in a bad message with it. But what do you think?
Oh, well, you know far better than I do because that is really, your specialty. But it's, it's, I think we would agree that it's one of the most challenging aspects of water, to manage well because it's very sensitive. The recharge, the replenishment of our groundwater aquifers is a very slow process, and so we have to be very, very careful. Again, going back to that metaphor of if you're using the water faster than it's getting replenished, you very quickly run into trouble. And again, to just help to explain that a little bit more to you, to your viewers and your listeners, it's what happens when you're using more groundwater than is being recharged or replenished is the level of the water of that underground water goes down, and as that happens, it can become more expensive to pump it out of the ground. In some cases, it can drop far enough that some wells will go dry. So it's a very, very challenging water resource to manage well. I think that, again, it goes back to making sure that we have the best available information about how much we can use without causing that depletion, that lowering of the water volume, the water level. And but in some places in the world, that's pretty challenging, right? Because they don't really have a lot of surface water. They don't have a lot of river flows. Saudi Arabia, has virtually no perennial rivers, in the country, and so they're almost entirely dependent upon groundwater. So
Or
there
California,
was
California also uses a lot of groundwater. That's
absolutely, absolutely, yeah. It's in many places like the United States. It's half of our water supply, right, is coming out of the ground. And that's where you know, there was a wonderful professor at King's College in London by the name of Tony Allen, and Tony Allen was he was just thinking about water one day as he tells the story, And he started thinking about these countries that depend on goods, food, clothing, other goods, far in excess of how much water they have available in their own country. And he said, well, of course, the way that they deal with that issue is they purchase those goods from other places that have more water available to produce those goods. And Tony gave it the term virtual water, right? That was where virtual water started with Tony Allen. And then he started, and then he had some graduate students, eager, smart graduate students like Arjen Hoekstra, and they said, well, then we need to start quantifying and mapping the virtual flows of water. How much water goes from the United States to the European Union, in the form of food or clothing, that sort of thing. So that is one way. There are ways other than we're not all self-sufficient in our consumption of our water needs and the goods that are produced using water. And so there are various means, but it does, I think, more directly to your point, really understanding how much water is available for our use in our local community or within our country, and trying to figure out ways to not use more than that at any given time. Otherwise, we get into trouble. It's unsustainable.
Agree.
Yeah.
Thank you. Finally, Brian, I believe that those of us working with water sustainability are part of a global community. What gives you hope right now, and how can people watching this can become part of the solution?
Well, I think it begins with building your own knowledge, your own awareness. That's why we're doing this. That's why you've helped to translate books in many different languages. It's why I wrote Chasing Water in the simplest terms that I possibly could. And it's a short book too. It's a really tiny little book. And so it starts there. Make sure that you're well informed, well educated about the topic.
Yep.
And then, I think getting involved in your local community, I think a lot of people jump right away to, I want to change the world. And I don't want to discourage anybody who has that inclination, that ambition. But there's a lot of benefit to getting involved in your local community and understanding what the particular challenges are in your local community, and showing up at the meetings of the leadership of the political, meeting the political leaders, and seeing whether or not your concern and your knowledge can start to change things. And then we use these metaphors of you throw a stone in a pond and the ripples go out. Well, that stone might begin in your local community and trying to influence the local situation. And what you learn there can be multiplied. That's what you and I have tried to do over the course of our careers, is we take what we've learned from trying things in this place or in that place. I mean, all of my work has been, I say in my bio that I've worked on more than 170 different projects. Those are all, at the end of the day, a local place, a local community. And then you start to see what works in different places and what doesn't work, and then you're able to be a more effective leader at broader and broader scales, I think.
Interesting. It's like the tidy up your bedroom before.
There you go.
Right?
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
Like this. That's good.
That's absolutely true. Absolutely true. Yeah. Take care of your own place first, and be helpful there, and then take what you learn and spread it.
There and move up from there. That's the idea. Yeah, good point. Very good.
Yeah.
I like it. So,
Yeah.
Brian, thank you so much for sharing your insight and energy with us today. Your work is not only impactful, but it is visionary on my view. You help so many people around the world see water in a new way. as something finite, precious, and worth protecting. Here at the Institute Água Sustentável, we share that same commitment, and I believe there's a lot of synergy between our missions.
Yes.
So maybe our paths can align in future projects. Who knows? Bringing
I
together
sh-
science, education, and action on a global scale. That would be very fun to work together and share the same mission. That's very good. So, and
Well,
everybody
thank
who's
you for the
watching this.
compliments and thank you for the compliments, but also thank you so much for the work that you're doing as well.
Oh,
Sorry.
no, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, to everyone watching this, if this conversation moved you, inspired you, or made you reflect, please like, comment, and share it above all. Subscribe to the channel to keep following these vital stories. Remember, all the links for Brian Richter are down here. You're going to see that you can click and you can see the book, you can see in his website, and maybe you can start working on a very nice mission. We make the world a better place by having you on our side. Okay? So water is not just a resource, it's life above all, because
Yeah.
the world needs water. See you in the next episode. Thank you, Brian. Welcome to joining us here today.
Thank you.